Hey guys, it's Jolene, and I'm just here with a little bit of an Easter message. Of course, I'm gonna be a bit of a heretic because that's how I roll, but I don't know about y'all, but around here, it doesn't quite feel like Easter yet. Um, we haven't arrived at the moment of resurrection, we are still in Holy Week. And so I want to go to Mark's gospel right now. The Gospel of Mark ends with the empty tomb. And that's it. There's no resurrection appearances. There's nothing in particular that tells us anything theologically. It's a mystery. But what we know still happens is what the apostles do. The apostles changed their life. So, on an Easter in which it's hard to think about resurrection happening quite yet, I look to the disciples, the apostles, the healthcare workers, the janitorial staffs, those working in supermarkets and with the elderly. The hope is still hard to see. It hasn't manifested yet. That thing that we're all kind of waiting for, looking for, hoping for, that we know, that we know comes. We know comes. We know there's an end to this coronavirus thing, right? Like, it ends at some point. We will be able to go back outside again. We will be able to see those that we love again. But it's not here yet. So I imagine that the tomb is empty. But Jesus hasn't appeared yet. And there is a great mystery about what comes next. The uncertainty. And what we know is that if Jesus didn't resurrect, if nothing like that happened, the disciples still changed their lives. After the death of Jesus, his followers committed themselves in a new, more intense way to the movement. And as Christians, most of us attribute that to the resurrection, to the big event that happened after Jesus' death that reinvigorated his community of followers and showed them something really unique and beautiful and that they couldn't have possibly imagined, no matter how many times he might have hinted at it. But if we're not ready for that yet, if we're not ready for resurrection, then just look at the disciples. There's an empty tomb, and the disciples are feeding the poor and the hungry. They're taking care of the widow and the orphan. They're living together, they're practicing communion and agape meals, and they're doing the thing. like harder than they've ever done the thing. And I don't know if that message will make sense to a lot of people, especially if you've grown up in a particularly theological tradition. That might just be like a really out there way of looking at a post-Easter message. But in a year when we're arriving at the date of resurrection, before we are seeing it in our own lives, I want to imagine that the tomb is empty, but Jesus hasn't appeared to the disciples yet. And if you're an atheist, this is the Easter message for you, right? Like, Jesus died. And if you can't believe in resurrection, what do we know? There's this thing called Christianity that happened and that exists with a fervor 2,000 years later. And if Jesus didn't resurrect, the disciples taught themselves something in that moment after Jesus' death. That Jesus' ministry was bigger than his life, and that what matters in this world is bigger than any one of us individually. And that even when hope is hard to see, when it feels like the world has come crashing down and there could not possibly be resurrection, we find people who resurrect themselves. Healthcare workers that get up after a horrible night's sleep that isn't long enough for what doctors recommend, and yet here they all are, getting up and doing the thing and working for that bigger thing that as yet it's still really hard to see. We haven't reached the end of this yet. And so maybe Jesus hasn't appeared to the disciples yet this year. But the disciples are still working. And for me, that's enough of an Easter message for this year. And I hope it is for you too, because I do believe in resurrection. This is the book for this week that I would use with young people. I'm not going to recommend an adult book this week, but this book I think is a really great book for wondering about mysterious things that are hard to understand. And it has some beautiful illustrations to some great things with light and movement and the ways that a mother touches her child. So yeah, happy Easter. Even if we're not quite ready for resurrection this year, it'll come.